Welcome to environmental sustainability. So as we move away from talking about human population and the population dynamics, we move towards fossil fuels, nuclear energy, and renewable energy, the way that we use energy in the world today, on our Earth today. So some energy sources that we talk about, obviously, we know that fossil fuels are a big one, and it's a big problem, and it always comes to the discussion when we're talking about the sustainability of the environment and making sure that, moving forward, we are going to be able to sustain the way that we are going and our energy consumption. So our bodies use energy every day to move and do work. The energy originates from the sun, because remember, although we cannot use photosynthesis, somewhere along the way, photosynthesis is being used by producers or plants, and either we are eating those plants or somewhere lower on the food web, something is eating those plants that we are then eating. So humans use energy to power machinery, heat their homes, communicate, grow crops, travel, and more. So the big ones that we always talk about are heating homes or buildings and travel. But keep in mind also, in order to power machinery and to build things and to grow crops, we also need a lot of power. Energy sources are going to include fossil fuels, which are the bad ones that we always talk about, nuclear power, which people have mixed feelings about, and then renewable energy, which is what people are trying to move towards as we go into the future. So some modes of renewable energy, you always hear about solar, you hear about wind, and there are others as well. So our energy sources have an immense impact on our lives, society, and the environment. Sources are influenced by the economy. A big one now we see is politics. As we move forward, politicians, you're going to have the left is going to have a big push for the renewable energy and an overhaul of all of our energy sources, and really trying to gut the infrastructure of our current energy uses and build new and use new renewable energy, where the right is going to have some pushback on that and try to look for more of a balance, probably, where they want to continue with fossil fuels and maybe use nuclear power and not completely gut the infrastructure and use renewable energy. But these politics were, hopefully as we move forward, there's bipartisanship, and we can see that they'll be able to work together and find a solution, so that as we move forward, we are doing the right thing for our environment, for our planet. And also public policy plays a role as well. So energy can change forms as it flows through a system. You have primary energy sources used in the form found in nature. Big one we're going to talk about is wood and coal, but there's also nuclear energy, geothermal, and there's the sun. Then you have secondary energy sources, which are made from our primary energy, which is electricity. So we talk a lot about the public perception of secondary energy sources. Everyone wants to switch to electric cars, or using electric instead of using fossil fuels. But what people don't really realize is that a lot of electricity is made from fossil fuels. So in using electricity, in switching to electricity, if you switch to an electric car, you're going to see that, all right, well, maybe that electricity that you're getting from the grid in order to charge your car is actually coming from fossil fuels. So you didn't really save anything. You're still burning those fossil fuels, and you're putting that carbon dioxide, that increased carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere, and you're, causing more and more global warming or climate change as you kind of don't realize it, because your car isn't emitting these things, but somewhere along the way it was emitted in making that electricity. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Differences in efficiency and cost drive decisions. So it's really, we're going to see that costs and efficiency is really going to play a role in why there's so much discussion about what's the best way to go moving forward. So costs include direct financial and energy costs, but also include environmental costs during extraction, refinement, transportation, and use. What are we doing? What is the ecological cost to using this energy, or extracting this energy, refining this energy? Fossil fuels are easily obtained, so we became dependent on them. And costs of extraction supply affect the prices. pollution and effects on the environment have led people to rethink the use of fossil fuels. So, you know, 100 years ago, no one really was thinking about this, although they saw that burning lots of coal led to a lot of soot in the air and issues with that, and people had respiratory issues. But as far as thinking about pollution and the effect that it would have on the environment, people didn't talk about that or discuss that or really see that for quite some time. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, people and animals were the driving force to getting work done. So before there really were cars, you're going to see that we used horses and people in order to get work done. We then, once the Industrial Revolution came, we had the steam engine, and this needed its own form of energy. It wasn't going to be people or horses that were going to be pushing it. It needed an energy source. So firewood became scarce, and the industry turned to coal as the primary source of energy to fuel the engines, because over time, as the Industrial Revolution went on and more steam engines were being used, we saw that you're cutting down a lot of forests, and it's harder and harder to get firewood. Keep in mind, if you are using all the firewood in an area and then you have to push out to a further area, then you have to transport that. That becomes even more of an issue as you're trying to fuel or find energy for these steam engines. So by 1920, coal provided 80% of all U.S. energy. So if you can think about, once upon a time, a lot of wood was being used. By 1920, they shifted completely from firewood, and really we saw 80% of energy that was being used, at least in the United States, came from coal. So coal was an excellent substitute for firewood, but it had some drawbacks. You had smoke and fumes, which are going to pollute cities, led to respiratory problems, also led to decreased biodiversity. It's hazardous to mine and dirty to handle. You hear about coal miners where they come home filthy, they end up with the black lung once they're a little bit older. You have ash must be removed, and steam engines were bulky and they were hard to operate. So by the late 1800s, oil provided an alternative to the steam power from the coal. So now you see another shift from the firewood to the coal, now to oil, with the invention of the internal combustion engine, which was a major breakthrough. You see that the steam engine became obsolete and oil became the new standard as an energy source. So you see over time where you're trying to make things better, become more efficient, and really find energy that is going to fuel our needs for the future. So using oil instead of coal actually improved air quality because you weren't burning that nasty coal that created that ash and that soot. The newer combustion engines powered by gasoline were light, more appealing than the old steam engines. Oil is now the major energy source for the world. But we see that coal still dominates parts of Europe, Eastern Europe, as well as China. In 2013, 87% of global energy came from fossil fuels. So even though you see that in recent decades we're trying to get away from these fossil fuels, that we still are immensely dependent on fossil fuels. 87% of global energy is on fossil fuels, and that is broken up into you have coal makes up about 30%, oil 33%, natural gas about 24%. So we're very reliant on coal, oil, and natural gas. Natural gas is the third fossil fuel behind oil and coal. So as much as oil leads the way and we still use a lot of coal, natural gas is making its way to the forefront, and it's found with oil when drilling for oil. It produces carbon dioxide and water when it is burned. It burns more cleanly than coal or oil, but it's still a fossil fuel. So eventually we can run out of natural gas as well. Pipelines now allow it to be transported instead of venting it to the atmosphere. It's used for heating, cooking, industry. It's clean, convenient, and a big thing is it's very inexpensive. So if you know anyone around here that has natural gas for their house, all right, it is actually supplied by Central Hudson, and people love it because it's very cheap. It's a lot cheaper than oil. You have oil, people have 270-gallon tanks of oil in their house, and that might be $800 to fill up, and they might have to fill it every 6 weeks or so in when it's in December, January, February. So it's very expensive. Where they see natural gas, their bill does not really go up too much along with their electric bill from Central Hudson. So it's inexpensive, and it burns a lot cleaner, and the furnaces that go along with it, they're a lot easier to maintain, and they're not as dirty. So people love natural gas. As we move away from oil, we see that people are really trying to transition to this natural gas. Now, it may seem like a good thing, and to me it is a good thing because it's inexpensive and it is a little bit cleaner than oil. But moving forward, do we really want to go towards another fossil fuel? The answer is probably not. So gas provides 30%, natural gas provides 30% of America's energy and 24% of the world energy. So you see that, once upon a time when we were dependent on completely oil and coal, now it is moving into the future and increasing in percentage that we are using. Electrical power is the amount of work done by an electric current over a given time. Most fossil fuel energy is used to generate electricity. So as much as people think of electricity as being a completely separate entity from fossil fuels, and as much as people want to believe that electricity is the way into the future, that we should move away from engines that use fossil fuels and move towards engines that are going to be run on electricity, it's really not the answer necessarily, because so much electricity is made from fossil fuels. We're not making that much electricity from solar panels or from wind turbines like people may think. A lot of it is coming from burning fossil fuels. So many people don't realize that. They get electric cars and they think, oh, I got an electric car, now I'm going green, I'm doing a lot better for the environment. But that's just not the fact, because we are still reliant on fossil fuels in order to create that electricity. Electricity enables modern technology. So appliances, computers, the internet, our modern technology, it all runs on electricity. So people think, oh, well, yeah, I'm not using, something that's running on gasoline, but in reality, in order to make that electricity, you had to burn some fossil fuels. So 32% of fossil fuel production is used to generate electricity in the United States. Electric generators, they consist of a coil of wire that rotates in a magnetic field. It also can be a stationary wire within a rotating magnetic field. Electric generators convert mechanical energy into electrical energy. So you have this mechanical energy switching to a different form of energy, the electrical energy. Energy is lost through, and this is why whenever you're looking to buy a wire, you want to think about what are you using this wire for? Whenever you have an extension cord, they say that it has to have the proper rating, because you're going to have resistance, you're going to have heat, and there's going to be transmission through that wire where you're going to have a loss of energy, and too much resistance can cause a problem with running your machine on that wire that isn't meant for that or doesn't have the proper rating. So 3 units of primary energy make 1 unit of electricity, but is very useful and indispensable. So we are burning 3 units of that primary energy, usually fossil fuels, in order to just make 1 unit of electricity. But obviously we are moving towards making electrical machines be more efficient, so they don't need as much electricity. So you kind of can see a balance there. Generating electricity uses a primary energy source: coal, oil, nuclear energy, some solar and geothermal, but we really aren't where we're supposed to be. It boils water to produce high pressure steam. The steam rises a turbine, and which is a sophisticated paddle wheel, which is coupled to a generator. It drives a turbine. The turbine and generator together is called a turbogenerator. There are other types of generator turbine combinations, such as gas turbogenerators, hydroturbogenerators, as well as wind turbines. You have generators with either a steam turbine, you have a gas turbine, or a water turbine. A hydroelectric plant has several generators attached to a large wind turbine. So these just show you the basic ideas, 1, 2, and 3. And this is kind of on a larger macro scale where you see a large water turbine with several generators connected to it. So electricity is seen as a clean energy source. While using electricity creates no pollution, generating it does. So people, like I've said many times, people don't really realize this because it's happening somewhere else. The fossil fuels are being burned somewhere else. You don't really see those emissions like you do coming from your car. So you think, hey, I don't see any emissions coming from my car. I'm doing a good thing. There's not a lot of pollution, but in reality, somewhere else, we're making that electricity for your car, and it is creating those emissions. So apart from it not solving the pollution problem, electricity is also an expensive way to heat homes. So this is why not too many people have electrical heating, because it is very expensive. That's why instead of going to straight electric heating and then hoping that we're getting electricity from a renewable source like solar or wind, people now use natural gas to heat their homes because it is cheap. So electricity is very expensive. Anyone that's ever had electric heat, they'll tell you that they don't really like it. So as much as people don't like oil because it's expensive, electricity is even worse when it comes to heating homes, heating buildings. Nuclear power once seemed to be very promising, but it's now distrusted because its potential for accidents, disposal of waste, and mining of uranium ore. So a big one when we talk about nuclear power is the disposal of waste. So as much as it might not put out those emissions like you think of with burning coal, it does create this waste, which is its own form of pollution. So that is not really what people once thought. They thought that it would be drive us into the future. We'd use nuclear power. We no longer need to depend on fossil fuels, but now that just isn't the case with it. A decreased use of nuclear power typically means an increased use of coal burning plants. So people are always protesting and hoping to shut down a nuclear power plant, but what they're really doing is they're making the industry burn more coal. So crude oil, the United States has abundant supplies of coal, natural gas, nuclear power, but we must import half of our crude oil. Okay, you hear about a lot of political issues, you have a lot of warfare over crude oil. That's because we don't have enough and we want it, we need it. So our dependence on imported oil causes trade imbalances, military actions, economic disruptions, and oil spills. Coal, crude oil, and natural gas come from biomass that produces many millions of years ago. That was produced many millions of years ago, so deposits are finite. All right, there's only a specific amount, and we can run out. Deposits are constantly being found, but our reserves may only last us 50 years. So people are always estimating how much do we have left. I've heard estimates of 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. So it really depends on what study you look at, who you talk to, but just a general idea. If we continue to go at the rate that we're going and we don't change things, 50 years is a good number to think of. So 50 years, not really a long time in order to, when you think about trying to change our whole infrastructure and move towards a different source of energy when we're so dependent on crude oil and fossil fuels. So energy flow through fossil fuels. This is just an excellent diagram showing you that you have solar energy going to plants and phytoplankton, and you have thick layers of organic matter or detritus accumulates, and then you have organic matter buried under the sediments, and then eventually over time you have heat, pressure, millions of years, and it's going to become oil and natural gas and coal, and then we are going to use those forms of energy in order to get work done, like to drive that car. So natural gas gaining popularity because it burns cleaner than coal or oil. It releases less carbon dioxide and pollutants, so it's better, but it is still a fossil fuel and it is still creating carbon dioxide and pollutants. You hear about fracking sometimes. Natural gas was typically accessed through these through vertical drilling until fracking was invented, where fracking makes the gas that is trapped in shale accessible now. So instead of having to do that vertical drilling, now we use fracking with these, which is short for hydraulic fracturing. It involves fracturing shale to release the gas trapped in it. Created a decrease in the cost to acquire the natural gas. So now instead of this vertical drilling, now we are fracturing the shale in order to release the natural gas, and it's cheaper. The fracking process starts by injecting a fluid mixture of water, sand, and chemicals into the shale, and these fracturing wells and storage pools in Colorado show right here that it can cause issues because you're taking this area where we find natural gas, and now we are kind of ruining that area in order to extract it. So you see in this picture, no one's living here now. They have completely created this for extracting that natural gas, and now you have these chemicals being pumped into the ground. So some concerns: over 1 million gallons of hydraulic fluids are pumped into just one well at a single stage, and the well can go through several stages. So chemicals are added to hydraulic fluids, which can leak into the groundwater and ultimately contaminate drinking water. Fracking cause water pollution. It can cause issues with drinking water. It also causes increased earthquakes. So as time goes on and we use more fracking, we will see more earthquakes. And you're going to see that nuclear power is still going to be discussed as we move forward, because there's so many people behind it in order to get away from the fossil fuels. But then there's a lot of people that aren't behind it because of the issue with pollutants. So once considered the future of energy consumption in the 1970s, the United States planned to have an overhaul to greatly increase the use of nuclear power plants to decrease our reliance on fossil fuels. But after the catastrophic accident at Chernobyl in the Soviet Union, or present-day Russia, in 1986, the feelings about nuclear power completely shifted, because you see that people were wiped out, and now the land has been barren. Now it's actually starting to make a comeback all these years later, but it really showed the nasty side of nuclear power and what can really happen if anything goes wrong, if any accidents were to occur. So people fear that there wouldn't be enough time to evacuate, and a catastrophic event occurred. So that's why we see with Indian Point, people are trying to shut that down, or we are shutting it down, because people are so worried that if something like Chernobyl happened, if an accident like that happened at Indian Point, no one would be able to evacuate the Hudson Valley, New York City, all the surrounding areas. So nuclear power involves controlling nuclear reactions, so energy is released gradually as heat, and the heat is used to boil water to produce steam, which turns a conventional turbogenerator. So you see all of these different forms are kind of doing the same thing. They're trying to turn a generator or a turbine in order to create that energy, that work that we want done. So nuclear reactions form new elements different from burning fuels. You have fission, which is a large atom of one element is split into two atoms of different elements, or you have fusion, so fission or fusion, where fusion has two small atoms joined to form a larger atom of a different element. So when you hear about nuclear bombs, or atom bombs, right, this is what they're doing. They are splitting atoms in order to create that massive energy. Now we're controlling them so that we can use that power, but when it's uncontrolled, that's where we get like an atom bomb. So nuclear power plants use fission, which is the splitting of specifically uranium-235, and uranium-235 occurs naturally in the Earth's crust. The U.S. uranium deposits are in Wyoming and New Mexico, where ore is mined from underground or open pits. When the reactions aren't controlled, the results can be catastrophic, like atom bombs, atomic bombs, and Chernobyl, as well as what happened out in Japan. Radioactive waste in creating nuclear power. You see that radioactive waste is created. You have high levels of waste, which is direct products of fission, which are highly radioactive, and then you have low levels, which are indirect products and have less radioactivity. Radioactive emissions can penetrate tissues when it is exposed to radiation. So these are some of the biological effects. Ionizing radiation displaces electrons from tissues, leaves behind charged particles or ions, breaks chemical bonds or changed molecular structures, which impairs their function. And radiation is not felt or seen, so you can go on for a long time slowly getting this exposure, not knowing it, and then ultimately having some adverse effects. So you have high doses of radiation can prevent cell division, which is a bad thing because we want our cells to divide. We want to make new blood cells, new skin cells, other tissues. It's used for the treatment of cancer, exposed under the supervision of medical professionals that know how to harness that radiation and how to direct that radiation. But it can cause death immediately when exposure is too high and you're not exposed in the proper way. So low doses can also damage DNA. So you have high doses, low doses, both can be an issue. Cells can form malignant tumors or leukemia. And keep in mind, you're not knowing that you're exposed to this, so suddenly you have leukemia and you find out, oh, I've been exposed to this because someone had this radioisotope next to me for a number of years at my job and we never really knew, or there was radioactivity in my job. So effects of exposure can go unseen for 10 to 40 years. Other effects, you have damage to eggs, sperm, which can cause birth defects, weakened immune system, as well as cataracts. Some sources of radiation exposure can be from many sources, normal background sources, uranium, radon gas. So some people have radon gas under their houses and they actually have a vent running through their house in order to vent it off. It comes from the Earth's crust, cosmic rays from outer space, medical, dental exposure. So if you ever go to the dentist and you have to get x-rays, you're going to see him put that lead vest on you so that it's just directing the rays at your face, which isn't that great because you have your brain in there. But they're covering your vital organs with that lead vest, and they're running out of the room and they're hitting the button. So it's, you're having a little bit of exposure with that, but for that dental professional or that medical professional that's always taking those x-rays, they don't want that constant reoccurring exposure to it. So there is radiation from x-rays as well as when you get a CT scan. And the main concern for nuclear power plant workers is not from normal operations. So I once took a class with a professor, and he actually worked at Indian Point. He told me there's nothing really to be worried about when you work at Indian Point as far as day-to-day operations. But the problem is your exposure to waste and any potential accident. So if he were to be involved with an accident, then it could be catastrophic for him. But as long as nothing really happened, normal operation of a nuclear power plant, not really an issue. Disposal of the radioactive waste is a major issue. Nuclear power was developed without solving the issue of waste disposal. So they knew that it created this waste, but they didn't really figure out what do we do with this waste. So developers assumed that geologic burial would be used, which involves burying solidified waste in deep, stable rock, but this has not happened. Spent fuel is stored in these deep swimming pool-like tanks, and then after a few years, they move it to these air-cooled dry casks which hold the spent fuel until the waste is ready for long-term storage, which would be, in that deep, stable rock. But this has not happened yet. So now we talk about renewable energy. This is what we want as we move forward. We want something that's going to be renewable and not cause too much pollution. Despite their benefits, there are some drawbacks. You have costs at switching systems. So as much as some politicians may say that they want to help us and that's why they want renewable energy, it also could be in order to shift. It would be the biggest shift in capital, in money ever. So if people suddenly got away from that old money, that oil money, and now switched to renewable money, we'd see a lot of money changing hands like we've never seen in modern history. So always keep in mind, that could be a big push. People don't want that old money to be going to those families anymore, or those people anymore. We want to see it shift to now this renewable energy company. And people will eventually make a lot of money off of this transition if all this money is going to fossil fuels, and you were to have investments into solar panels, and everyone started using these solar panels that you bought stock in, that would be a big shift from one cohort to another cohort. So keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about why haven't we shifted, or can I necessarily believe everything that I'm told. Intermittent supplies and coordinating systems are also a drawback. The technology may be in its infancy, while fossil fuel use is becoming increasingly more efficient. So as much as we say fossil fuels are bad, the things that use fossil fuels are becoming more and more efficient and using less and less of those fossil fuels, while the technology behind renewable energy is not quite very advanced at the moment. As far as like solar panels are concerned, okay, they're just in their infancy. They're not exactly the most efficient things. They don't create the most energy possible. We're still working on that technology. So fossil fuels have come a long way over over 100 years, while solar panels are in their infancy. Being too ambitious about moving away from fossil fuels too quickly raises some significant questions as well. Renewable energy used in the United States, we have biomass energy, which is typically from it could be from organic waste, could be from a lot is from wood, considered renewable because you can grow more trees. You have hydropower, wind, and then solar, which everyone always talks about, only about 3.5%, and then geothermal is 2.2%. This is as of 2013. Burning fossil fuels has increased carbon dioxide in the air by 40%, increasing global temperatures and sea levels, where we saw that coral bleaching and the decrease in the biodiversity, and this can then have more and more effects on other food webs and other ecosystems. Carbon dioxide output will increase as global demand for energy increases as we move into the future. So as much as we see that things are becoming more efficient and are creating less emissions, we're also using a lot more energy as our world population increases. Oil and gas reserves will not last forever, so we really want to move towards that renewable energy. And other pollutants are given off: sulfur dioxide, mercury, nitrogen oxide, along with that carbon dioxide. So it's not just about carbon dioxide, it's all of these pollutants that we want to get away from as we move towards renewable energy. So this really is a call for a revolution, a major change. All right, it took 70 to 100 years to build the infrastructure surrounding the fossil fuel industry. In order to switch to renewable energy, it would take a major revolution, a major push that would not only have to have government support, but also the industry support. We would need some movement, which ultimately would have to be some capitalistic push where we are becoming more efficient and we're making better renewable resources, renewable energy resources, and the government would subsidize those as well. And really, what we need is someone to invent, or some company to come up with something that is so good that it would be silly not to switch to it. All right, right now we see that it's hard not to stick to the fossil fuels, especially with the creation of natural gas. It's hard to get away from that because it's cheap, it's becoming more efficient, all right, it's making less and less emissions. So that is pushing us further and further towards it. What we need is really a push to invent something that is a renewable resource or renewable energy source that is going to be cheap. It's going to cause no pollution, and it's going to be really silly not to switch. I always talk about it as the idea of Walmart and Amazon. Okay, once upon a time, people said Walmart could not be stopped. It was the biggest, it was the best, everything was the cheapest. There's no way to take it down. And what Amazon did was they came in and they made up a better idea. They made it silly to go to Walmart. All right, why would I go to Walmart when I get free 2-day shipping on this, and it comes and it's actually cheaper than Walmart, and I get to pick whatever I want, and they have way more stuff than if I just go to my local Walmart. Now I have endless amount of selection. So what we need is that kind of push, but just the same, just when similar to energy. So Just like Amazon outdid Walmart, we now need new renewable energy sources to outdo the old energy sources, the fossil fuel energy sources. Solar power comes from thermonuclear fusion in the sun. You have radiant energy, which reaches the Earth as ultraviolet, visible, and infrared energy. 50% of the energy reaches the Earth, with 30% being reflected and 20% being absorbed by the atmosphere. So we only get 100% of what's coming towards us. We only get 50%, I'm sorry, of what's coming towards us. A vast amount of solar energy reaches the Earth. Full sunlight delivers about 700 watts per square meter to the Earth's surface. The sun gives 10,000 times the energy we use. So don't let anyone ever tell you that we wouldn't get enough energy from the sun in order to power everything that we have. The solar energy is abundant but scattered, so it varies with the season, the latitude, and the atmospheric conditions. If you think about at the poles, there are times when you have 24 hours of darkness. You might have times of the year where there's 24 hours of light, but those would affect the solar power. So we must turn to intermittent sources such as fuel, electricity that can be used. It's all about the collection, conversion, and the storage of solar energy. So a big thing you see as a push now is batteries. Now, batteries are going to use lithium, which also has to be mined and has had devastating effects to different land masses, different areas in the world, but we're pushing towards those batteries in order to store any renewable energy, any solar energy that we get from the sun. Hard to do, but it must be cost effective in order to move forward. You have solar heating of water, which we don't typically talk about, but it's a flat plate collector, a thin, broad box. The black bottom absorbs sunlight and heats up. The water in the tubes absorb the heat. The glass top prevents heat loss, and then you have the hot water stored in a tank. You have active systems, pumps the heat water. Pumps move the heated water. Then you have passive systems that use gravity and convection to move the water from the collector to the tank, which is higher than the collector, and the water rises due to convection. Solar heating, there are 60 million solar hot water systems, but the initial cost is still too high, 5 to 10 times greater than gas or electric heater. So better for our environment, but that's not push enough to get people to switch. So solar space heating only circulates air through the collector box instead of water, which is another option. The biggest concern is solar production of electricity, not hot water or air. All right, we don't really care so much about using solar heating. We care about using solar production, creating energy from solar for electricity. So in creating electricity from solar energy, we have these photovoltaic cells, which you have a wafer of material. One wire is attached to the top, one to the bottom. You have sunlight hit the wafer, which puts out an electric current, and then 40 linked photovoltaic cells can light a light bulb. So think about, you need a lot of these in order to power a city. So PV cells are highly sophisticated. Light hitting the wafer causes an electron to go from the lower layer to the upper layer. Solar cells convert light energy directly to electrical power with 15% to 20% efficiency. You have silicon, which is actually one of the most abundant elements, is the main material used in solar cells. All right, so we have plenty of that, but also it's something that we do have to use. So it's not something that it's not like when we start using solar panels, there's not things that are going to have to be recycled or used or anything like that. We're still using materials, and we have to keep that in mind, which ultimately would drive the price of silicon through the roof. Inverters act as an interface between the solar PV modules and the electric grid, which is like Central Hudson, or batteries. So you have to convert the DC to AC, that direct current, to alternating current, which is compatible with the electricity from the grid. Costs are still substantial. We need costs to come down in order to have that big push where everyone wants to switch. So some drawbacks: solar power plants need other sources of energy when sunlight is not available. Manufacturing PV panels produces pollution. So, in making those PV panels, there is some pollution that is created. And if you think about, okay, now if we switched everyone over and we need PV panels for all of the world, enough to power all of our cities, you're creating a lot of pollution that way. Birds are incinerated when they fly into the path of concentrated radiation of solar towers. Researchers hope to find a way to deter the birds from these areas that contain solar powers, but it is something that we have to think about moving forward. You have indirect solar energy through hydropower. Energy from the sun is the driving force behind dams, firewood, windmills, and sails. So you don't think of it like that, but we need solar energy in order for firewood and windmills and sails and dams. The force of falling water can turn paddle wheels to grind grain, saw logs, or run simple machines. You have hydropower, which hydroelectric dams use water under high pressure to drive a turbogenerator. So once again, you see that reoccurring theme where we have turbines and generators. Wind farm is a term for multiple wind turbines in the same place. The land can still be used for agriculture. So sometimes you'll see that down south, maybe out west, the farmers have these big wind turbines on their farms, and they plant around them. They're a reliable, efficient, and pollution-free source of energy. The amount of wind that can be tapped is immense. All right, so we're not running out of wind, just like we're not running out of sunlight. Drawbacks: you have intermittent winds, require a backup source of energy. We can't just rely on wind, because if it's not windy for a couple weeks, then you don't have any energy. So you need, backup sources, or you need batteries that are going to be charged off of when we have a lot of wind. And wind farms can be visually unappealing and noisy. So once upon a time, they wanted to put all of these out off of the coast, but people that owned oceanfront property said, I see those things out there. I paid a lot of money. I don't want them there. So there's that political fight once again, where people are going to, fight City Hall. Burning firewood for heat is the oldest form of energy. We call it biomass energy, energy that's derived from present-day photosynthesis. So wood pellets, firewood, even organic waste, generating methane and producing alcohol, or more specifically ethanol. This is all biomass energy. Renewable energy for transportation. So the most critical need for a substantial energy future is a new way to fuel vehicles. Remember, electric cars run on electricity that is often produced by burning fossil fuels. You have biofuels, which are organic matter, like ethanol and biodiesel. Sources of biofuel come from agricultural and food commodities. Ethanol comes from fermented corn or fermented sugarcane or sugar beets or some other grains. You have biodiesel made usually from soybean oil. These fuels only make up a small percentage of energy used by vehicles. Now keep in mind, if we were to switch completely to those, now you're going to have an issue with, all right, now we're making more corn. We have to make more corn in order to make more ethanol, and in doing so, then we're adding, more pollution by harvesting these things, and we're having more negative effects, and the price of corn, the price of food goes up. So, not a reliable source to completely switch to, but something that maybe can help us get away from our use of fossil fuels. Hydrogen gas as an energy source, once thought to be a great idea. Now we see that it's not really going to be the answer that we need. Cars can be adapted to run on hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is not a fuel, but an energy carrier like electricity. It must be generated using another source of energy. So once again, just like with electricity, yeah, it sounds great, but you need some other source of energy like a fossil fuel in order to generate it. So the only major byproduct of burning hydrogen gas is water. That sounds great, but remember, in order to generate it, we need another energy source, which doesn't really solve our problems. But there's almost no hydrogen gas on Earth, so now we're spending more money and burning more fuel in order to make this hydrogen gas. Geothermal energy, hot molten rock of Earth's interior can be close enough to heat groundwater and produce almost boiling water. You have geothermal energy using naturally heated water or steam to heat buildings or produce electricity. Geothermal heat pump systems, they use loops of buried pipes filled with antifreeze solution to heat homes. eventually pays for itself and saves energy, but the initial cost is very high. At Black Rock Forest, they actually have this heat pump that they have installed. It doesn't really keep the place that warm, in my opinion. You can't crank it up to 90, but it is a source of heat, so it doesn't really get the place up to the 80s, I would say, but it's always like a constant temperature of maybe high 60s in the building that they have this geothermal energy. And this is just an idea of what a geothermal heat pump system looks like. So deep, and this is just a simple drawing, but it's actually it can be hundreds of feet below the ground, very deep. They dig these areas where it creates this heat exchange pipes, and then it's going to pump that air into the house. So keep these things in mind as we move forward, as we start talking more about pollution and recycling and what we can do to look towards a sustainable future.